My name is Justin Adams. I'm the CEO of AlertWatch, and AlertWatch is a U of M spinout, and we spun out about 2.5 years ago, and we've had quite a journey in those 2.5 years. And I guess the part we want to talk about today is what we had to do to get through 510K clearance with the FDA. And AlertWatch is a patient monitoring product that's used in operating rooms. It was developed at the University of Michigan out of the Department of Anesthesia. And there's a lot of confusion about sort of what software products need FDA clearance and why they need FDA clearance and what features sort of push you into that category. Now, a lot of folks are surprised to hear that most electronic medical record systems are not cleared by the FDA, and even though they continue to add features that sort of push them in that direction, they have sort of, in a sophisticated way, they have skirted the issue of whether their products introduce patient risk. Now, of course they do, but the FDA still considers them sort of a data depository as opposed to sort of an interactive system. And so the first question that we had to ask ourselves is sort of why do we need FDA clearance? Well, our product, and if you need to see a picture of it, I would go to our webpage and you can click on the demo and see that it's got, a beating heart, an outline of a body, and it integrates a bunch of different data from the medical record system. So we needed FDA clearance, first of all, because it provides clinical decision support. So that means that you are telling the clinician to do something. You're not just presenting data and allowing them to make the decision. You're going one step further and saying, you might recommend this, you might try this. The second facet of it is that it's in real time. So we take real-time physiologic data and we present it on desktop computers and mobile devices. And anything real-time that's hooked up to a patient is definitely an FDA device. So in our case, we're software only, but the sources of our data are, pulse oximeters, EKGs, and other devices that are hooked up to the patient. So because the sources of our data are regulated, that means that our product is regulated. And finally, if you take a look at our product, we present the info using kind of a brand new methodology. Because we present the info using a new type of display, they were curious if we had done enough analysis to make sure that we weren't going to hurt someone by presenting info in a sort of non-intuitive manner. And so the question other companies might want to ask themselves, first of all, think about, do you need FDA clearance and do you not? The second question is sort of why do you want it? So even if you don't need it or if you're right in that gray area, it does add legitimacy to your company and to the product. It means that you can sort of, from a hospital point of view, they will view your product as less risky than a product that does not have FDA clearance. And then the last thing is that FDA deficiency letters are typically made public. Now, a deficiency letter is when they think you are behaving in a manner that is sort of irresponsible. And if you remember 23andMe last year, they got slammed pretty hard by the FDA. Now, it's my understanding that the company had a lot of opportunities to respond in a timely manner to the FDA's questions, and they didn't. But still, deficiency letters are made public, and if you have that out there, that's a real problem for the company. So a lot of times you kind of just want to go through it. So if they come back to you a year later and think, boy, didn't you guys know you were a regulated medical device? You're not caught kind of flat-footed. So this is a little timeline that I've prepared just to kind of give you a sense of how long and how expensive of a journey it was. So I came on board in the spring of 2012. And so in May, we really started thinking about this and thinking about how do we get the clearance, Who do we need on the team? How much work is it going to take? So the first thing we did was try and find a consultant who could work with us. Now, this ended up being more difficult than it seems. There are a lot of FDA consultants out there. A lot of them are kind of snake oil salesmen, I would say. But there are some that are very sophisticated and are really going to help you get where you need to go. So the first thing is to find one. Now, there are not that many folks that have done software-only products. Depending on your area of specialty, you really want to find someone who's gotten similar products through FDA. So if it's a drug, you need someone who's strong on therapeutics. If it's a hip joint, find someone who's worked on physical devices. If it's a heart valve, same thing. So in our case, we found one. They didn't end up being kind of up to code, and so we went and found another one and spent some money in the meantime. The next thing we did was start work on our quality system, was basically a documentation system that tells people sort of what your process is and how you go about making sure that the software is safe and all that. In parallel, we started work on our 510K. Now, again, just getting straight answers on what you need to file a 510K was took some time. So again, this is where did you know you would need FDA before you founded your startup? I'm going to answer the question from Team 22, and that's did we know we needed FDA? When I came on, the team had a sense that it was going to be necessary. They had gotten a little piece of advice that the product was regulated. We didn't know how long it would take, but we knew we'd have to do it. So I came on, basically when I came on was the real founding of the company, and we spun the technology out in June of that year. So anyway, it wasn't really a surprise. I guess the length of the effort and the cost of the effort was a surprise. So hopefully that answers your question. But typically an opinion on your FDA, are you class 1, class 2, class 3? If those terms don't mean anything to you, class 3 is in the body, class 2 is on the body, and class 1 is away from the body. So a heart valve's class 3, class 2 is a pulse oximeter, class 1 is a tongue depressor. So you really need to know that before you start budgeting for your time and your milestones. Let's see. So it took us until this is a long time here. So took us all fall and part of the winter to actually complete all these documents and file our initial 510K on February 15th of 2013. So right after Valentine's Day. It took them about a month. They had some billing issues, and there was a little bit of a snafu. It was just a documentation snafu. But they started officially reviewing it in March 15th. The FDA technically has 90 days to complete a 510K. The clock stops every time they get back to you. So they typically like to be completed with their initial review in 60 days. So we, and in that sense, they did. They started on 3/15 and they got back literally 60 days later. At that point, we had spent about 10K, and another 15K by the time we had sort of analyzed these issues and really come up with a plan. Now, they sent back a list of issues that were very intimidating. In fact, it was really funny. My members had been hurt. So, but they sent us a list of about 21 deficiencies or issues, some significant and some not so significant. So we had really missed the mark as far as could we get through without too much scrutiny, or were they really going to come down on us? And you don't really know until you get in there. And part of this is just building trust and familiarity with the regulatory folks that are looking at your case. The person who oversees your case is the same person throughout the whole process. So part of it is just sort of starting to form a human relationship with that person. Really quick point, A lot of folks do a pre-filing meeting if they have significant questions. This can be a good idea or a bad idea. It's a strategic question. We didn't do one because a lot of times when you do these meetings, instead of doing 15 things, let's say, they'll just give you the list of all 25. And since they have it on the record that they told you those things, you may have to be held to a higher bar than if you just sort of filed with the 15 things and ask for forgiveness on the others. So it's a strategic question of whether you want to go in before you really know what your problems are, or whether you want to wait until they tell you what the problems are. So anyway, June 2013, let's just go to the next page here. July 2013, we realized we had to do usability testing. This is a hot button issue for the FDA. So if your product has an interface or any user interaction, you will be required to do usability testing. They have guidelines for this. There's a document. There's guideline documents for everything, but basically you need 15 users to use the product, try and complete a variety of tasks. So we had a ton of work to do here. It was pretty disheartening, and we had to spend just over $30,000 to work with a usability firm because time was of the essence. So we spent all that money to have a usability term help rewrite these tasks, get a bunch of doctors to show up on the weekend, pay them to show up, and have them use the software and see if they made mistakes while using it. Since they were using this in the operating rooms, any mistakes could and likely would harm the patient. But we discovered that the product was actually quite usable, which was the whole point of the product, so that was a relief. It took us 6 months. So again, we got our response in March. We got the FDA's response in March. We filed our response November 20th, right about 6 months later. They responded with 3 more issues related to, it was like, what tone are your alarms? Did you follow the ISO guidelines for, colors and, all sorts of things like that. We talk again in December. They take 2 weeks off, so they asked us to submit our response after they got back from vacation. We did that, a couple more odds and ends, and then we got clearance in February 7th of that year. So if you can remember, we started working on it in the spring of 2012. We filed about 6 months later in February of 2013, and then we got clearance 1 year, almost to the day later. So it was about an 18-month journey from when we started working on it. Are we doing okay as far as the pacing? I know. Okay, we had some difficulties there. So what was the damage? So it cost about $50,000 for regulatory consulting. We obviously budgeted a lot less. And usability testing was around, I have a question, just a minute. Regulatory usability testing was around $35,000 because we were in a hurry. You can do it yourself. So I'm going to answer both questions here. One question is, who pays for all the work? Well, we got private investment. We did not have a grant. We were already a spin-out, so there was no sort of department, so to speak, that would pay for it. So we had already gotten $600,000 in funding from, private investors. So at this point, we were really on the hook to complete these milestones with that funding. Now, in addition to the $600K, we got matching funds from Spark and BRCC, which is a Kalamazoo organization. They invested, and so I think we had $600K, and that eventually went up to about $1 million. Since then, we've raised a little bit more. Why didn't the tech transfer office at U of M engage with this process? Well, I think it's a pretty specialized process. So we always were comfortable sort of walking down the hall, but because we were a private entity that was just having to rent office at the NCRC, there wasn't really a lot for them to do. Beyond, cutting us a check to pay for usability testing. So again, we consulted with them and shared our experience, just like we're doing today, but there wasn't really much else for them to do. I think they probably, our experience has probably been useful for them and some of the mentors and residents. Did this process slow down your market expansion? Yes, not too much, because it's a new product. We had pilot sites. We already were in 3 hospitals. So there was only one hospital that said, we don't want to move forward because you don't have FDA clearance. The fact of the matter is that most of our customers didn't even know that it required it. They have no clue. So the buyers, the anesthesiologists, the IT departments, they look at a piece of software like this, and they would never know to ask, do you have FDA clearance? Now, if the FDA finds out that you have been making money on a product that is, you filed a clearance, a 510K for, but you haven't gotten it yet, then you're caught in breaking the law. So it did slow it down, but I would say that it slowed it down by probably 6 months. Mostly it just cost a lot of money, because while we were doing this, we weren't working on new features. So I think what it slowed down is our ability to develop version 2 and version 3 of the product and break into different units of the hospital and just general good accomplishment of these other milestones. So it costs just under $100,000 to sort of get through the process, and took 18 months from the start. We hired a technical writer, so that person worked about half time on this and half time on other things. The CTO had to do various testing and documentation drafting, and then I also contributed a portion of my time to help with validation, help review documents, do risk analysis. I have an engineering background, so I pitched in wherever I could. And then the clinical founders had to call in favors from other chairs and other MDs. It's pretty burdensome. We could have done it cheaper, probably could have done it faster, but I would say, there's only so many ways to cut corners here. My suggestion is, if you can, make a product that doesn't require FDA clearance, obviously. But for a lot of you, I know that's really not a choice. And by the way, this is a if you are doing a new drug or something, obviously your process is, 5 to 10 years, not 18 months. One of the key things that we weren't doing that is important to note is we weren't really pushing the boundaries of science. We weren't creating, we were just taking existing standards of care and highlighting when they weren't being met and when they were harming the patient. So we were taking existing science and studies. We weren't actually trying to say, well, when the heart does this, you need to give this. So because we weren't trying to push the boundaries of science, we could have had to file a new product. Not the NPA, but a PMA. But we didn't have to do that. Lessons learned. So the key hot button issues at the FDA right now are usability, security, and mobile. So usability, as I said, we did a usability study. You have to do 15 users. If there are different types of users who use your product, you need 15 of each. And then you need to put them through every major task. And it all has to sort of tie together with your risk analysis. Security is a hot button issue, and then mobile's hot button, meaning if it runs on a mobile device, they kind of view wireless as having different risks as a wired product. Many developers and employees simply won't do the work. So our team was pretty rugged, and no one minded doing what was very unglamorous work. But I have to say that a lot of folks just simply won't do the work. And so you may find that it's not about dollars and everything. It's just about finding people who will do it. Went through several consultants before finding a competent one. Many mobile risks are not as high risk. Mobile apps are not as high risk. Your experience may be less challenging. I don't know exactly what products you're working on, so you really have to sort of think about what you're doing. There's some guidance documents out there for mobile products, mobile medical products, and they can help you kind of find out what your path is going to be. And it made our product better. So we learned some things about that we weren't doing well. So that was rewarding, I guess. My list of what gets submitted, this is sort of fine print, but there's about 15 documents that you submit along with a few other things. And they all have to kind of flow together. It's just really interesting. The risk analysis flows into the requirements, flows into the design document. You have to do traceability to show that you have understood and corrected all the risks. You have to show that you verified it, validated, and you have to show the usability results. And they all have to flow together, meaning if there's a risk you have thought about in the risk analysis, that has to flow into the requirements, the design, the verification, the validation, and the usability. So all that has to kind of align, and it's a rather complicated thing. Yeah.
Subsequent releases, so you do this at the version 1, and you guys
Yeah.
do an update, and when they require you to do that. Of course, you cover the initial things, and if you do updates, things change.
Yeah, so there's a process called a letter to file, which means that if you make small changes, you just file a letter saying you didn't think it. Oh, I'm going to repeat the question. When do you need to file another 510K? We have an OR product. If we were to move into a new unit of the hospital, like the ICU, the emergency department, we would need to file a new 510K. So if the use case changes, you have to file a new 510K, and that's covered in the indications for use. And you can go find indications for use for any medical device. So if you're telling people to use the product in a new way, then you need to file again. If you have introduced a new major risk, for example, if we go mobile, which our initial product is not, we likely will have to file a new 510K. That's a gray area. So what you can do is do these letters to file, they're called, and it means that you go in and you assess the risk and you do all of this work, but you don't actually file any paperwork with the FDA. So then when they come around and audit you 18 months after you get your clearance, they may not agree with you, but at least you followed a legitimate process to get to your conclusion. Any other questions? I think that's the last slide.
So you guys mentioned in hindsight you have better visibility. Like if you had to pin it down to one or two things, you said, you know what, I wish I knew this.
Yeah. So what would be the one or two things we would have done differently in hindsight? We would have done the usability testing up front. There was an ISO document 606.8.1 something. We would have laced our requirements document and validation with that, but the usability testing would have been the key one. I guess the other big one was when we chose all these limits, these default limits, because they recognize that if a device shows up, like if a heart monitor shows up in a hospital, it's going to get turned on with whatever the default settings are. Most people don't change them. So they wanted to know how we came to the conclusion that our default limits were valid. So we have to go poll a bunch of doctors and provide all the references we used for those default limits. So default limits have a validation, have a sort of a rationale for those, and the usability testing. What if they decide to use consumer grade sensors? Yeah, so you need to consider the entire system when deciding whether you need FDA clearance. But the burden is not on the product, like an iWatch, for example. The burden will likely not be on them as the data collection device. The burden will need to be on your device that takes, for example, heart rate readings and says, we think you're going to have a heart attack, because you're the one making the claim that you know when someone's having a heart attack, not Apple or not, Pebble or whoever. So the question is really, whoever is trying to do something that's like a medical device needs to look at the whole system from beginning to end, down to what version of Windows you're using, what version of SQL Server you're using, and you need to say where the risks are and that you validated those sources. So you need to submit, the algorithm developer. again, if you're developing the sensors and the software, you obviously are going to develop, you're going to submit the FDA clearance. How did you pick your first and second FDA consultant? Well, our first one came recommended from a product consulting firm. He ended up being a real kind of weird guy. He just didn't work well with the team, so he came recommended. Otherwise, I asked a few more references, and they pointed us in the direction of someone who had worked at the FDA for 10 years and then had gone on and done some private work. Now, I would say that this person ended up having to learn on the job too. So she was expensive, a couple, what, $200-300 an hour. So not as expensive as a good attorney, but some of these folks are $100 an hour, 150, and if they don't know what they're doing, they're not going to help you. So it was a bit of a trial and error. But once we found what we thought was the right person, the rest was just managing how much of her time we took. So Team 22, hopefully that answer on kind of who needs to file for FDA clearance is clear, but you need to take a system level approach on it. Finding an FDA consultant is not easy, but they're out there. You can, ask tech transfer and they can talk to us. Yeah, we do. And we made the first introduction to them and kind of vetted them and I think the relationship has expanded beyond then. But so any other questions? Yeah, hopefully this is helpful. It's a bit depressing, honestly, not going to lie. But if you have a team that doesn't mind getting their hands dirty, you can do this for cheaper and with fewer hurdles. So that's it.